Most people planning retirement have already accepted a quiet compromise in their heads. They've told themselves that the farmhouse dream, a few acres, a porch with a view, maybe a garden out back, is exactly that, a dream, something you work toward for 30 years and still can't quite afford when the time comes. Tennessee is currently making a strong case that those people are wrong. The state charges no personal income tax. Its property tax rate sits at 0.64%. The national average is over 1%. The overall cost of living runs roughly 11% below the national baseline. And buried inside state law is a program that lets qualifying senior homeowners lock in their property tax bill permanently. Not cap it, lock it. So even if the land around you starts appreciating, your tax obligation stays exactly where it was the day you qualified. That's the foundation. Here are 15 affordable rural Tennessee towns perfect for farmhouse retirement. Nunnelly. If you're looking for the lowest cost of entry farmhouse market in Middle Tennessee right now, there isn't much of a debate. Nunnelly wins. Located in Hickman County, about an hour west of Nashville, Nunnelly recorded a median home sale price of roughly $43,892 in early 2025. That number isn't a typo, and it isn't a distressed property artifact. It reflects a small, high turnover inventory of agricultural parcels and modest residential structures. Properties that move quickly and reset the median with each sale. For a retiree who wants to build or fully restore a farmhouse, rather than inherit someone else's layout and decisions, that low entry price is close to irreplaceable in a state where rural land values have been quietly appreciating for a decade. The land itself is dense hardwood forest with access to the Buffalo and Duck rivers threading through the county. Privacy here isn't marketed, it's just a function of the terrain. Very few people pass through Nunnelly on their way somewhere else, which means the quiet is consistent and reliable rather than seasonal. Hickman County's median annual property tax bill runs around $1,089, so once you're in, the overhead of holding acreage stays low across a long retirement timeline. Centerville provides access to Ascension St. Thomas Hickman for local medical needs, and Columbia's larger healthcare facilities sit within about 30 miles. Nunnelly isn't a town with a lot of bells and whistles. It's a blank canvas in a county that makes it affordable to sit on land and do exactly what you plan to do with it. Hohenwald. Hohenwald doesn't look or feel like most rural Tennessee towns, and that's because it wasn't built by the same people. The town was founded in the late 19th century by German and Swiss immigrants, and that heritage is still visible in the architecture and the culture. The courthouse downtown, Depression-era brick listed on the National Register of Historic Places, anchors a streetscape that reads more like a European market town than a Mid-South County seat. The western highland rim topography it sits on, about 80 miles southwest of Nashville, provides rolling hardwood hills with excellent drainage. For farmhouse foundations and kitchen gardens, the soil here performs well. Home prices dipped significantly in the period leading into 2026, with median sale prices reaching approximately $159,000, a reflection of a buyer's market that hadn't fully corrected yet. For a retiree with time to act before that, correction happens, the timing is relevant. Lewis County's median annual property tax sits around $795, which is among the lowest figures on this list. The town is also home to the 2,700-acre elephant sanctuary, which draws conservation-minded residents and helps establish a community culture that takes the natural landscape seriously rather than treating it as a backdrop. For a retiree who intends to work with their land rather than simply own it, that cultural alignment matters. The surrounding hills and the community that chose them tend to attract the same kind of person, which means the neighbors you find in Hohenwald are likely to understand what you're doing and why. For a retiree who wants a town with a distinct identity and a cost structure that shouldn't exist given what that identity offers, Hohenwald is a hard place to argue against. Rogersville. Tennessee's second oldest town doesn't trade on its age. It just happens to look like it was built to last, because it was. Rogersville in Hawkins County in the state's northeast corner has federal and Victorian-era buildings along its main streets that date to the 1780s. This isn't a preservation project with roped-off displays. These structures are storefronts, offices, and residences, active parts of a town that has simply never had reason to tear them down. The sidewalks are accessible, the pace is predictable, close to 20% of the population is already 65 or older, which means the town's social infrastructure, its medical access, its community programming, its retail presence, has been calibrated over decades to serve the people actually living there. When a senior population of that size has been present long enough, the town stops adapting and starts simply being the right fit. Median home listing prices came in around $199,000 in late 2025, which sits well below the statewide median of roughly $402,900. Cherokee Lake is a short drive from most rural properties in the area, offering fishing and boating that can become a genuine weekly habit rather than an occasional outing. The soil in the Great Valley around Rogersville is rich limestone residuum, productive for heirloom gardening and small orchards without requiring significant soil amendment. For the retiree who wants a cutting garden or a small fruit operation, the land cooperates. Hawkins County's property tax median runs about $940 annually. It is a town where the retirement infrastructure was built by the people who already chose it, which tends to make the experience of arriving there feel less like a gamble and more like a logical conclusion. And if Rogersville's Mountain Valley setting already sounds compelling, Greeneville adds something most towns in this region can't offer: Greeneville. Greeneville was once the capital of the state of Franklin, a short-lived independent republic that briefly existed before Tennessee achieved statehood. It was also the home of President Andrew Johnson. That history is woven into the physical layout of the town in a way that turns a routine errand into something that occasionally stops you mid-step. Located in the shadow of the Cherokee National Forest, with the Appalachian Trail accessible from the surrounding hills of Greene County, Greeneville sits at an unusual intersection of outdoor access and civic depth. Median home listing prices land around $327,000, but the real opportunity for farmhouse buyers is in the raw acreage. Undeveloped land in Greene County can still be found for under $100,000, which means a retiree with a clear vision and some patience can assemble a property on their own terms, choosing the elevation, the sun exposure, the distance from the road, rather than inheriting someone else's decisions. That flexibility at that price point is increasingly rare in a state where word has spread. Greene County's property tax median is $803 per year, low for a town with active arts programming, a well-funded public library, and immediate access to two of the region's most significant outdoor destinations. The local theater and the community cultural scene here reward engagement rather than passive observation. A retiree who shows up and participates tends to find that participation returned. For the person who doesn't want to choose between access to the outdoors and access to intellectual life, Greeneville makes a credible argument that the choice isn't necessary. Mountain City. Here's what nobody really talks about when it comes to farmhouse retirement in the mountains: heat, or more specifically, the relief of not having it. Mountain City sits in the far northeastern corner of Tennessee at the convergence of the state's borders with Virginia and North Carolina. The Iron Mountains rise around it. The Cherokee National Forest surrounds it on multiple sides. Elevations here run meaningfully higher than most of Tennessee, which translates to cooler summers, a factor that matters more each year for aging adults trying to manage outdoor activity without the physiological cost of extreme heat. The air quality reflects the elevation and the surrounding forest cover. Stargazing in Johnson County regularly rivals what most people have to travel significant distances to find. Johnson County Community Hospital operates a dedicated senior health solutions program focused on behavioral health for older adults, a specialty that is harder to find in small-town healthcare than most people expect before they start looking. Behavioral health access for seniors is one of the most underfunded and geographically sparse resources in rural medicine. Finding it in a county with a population under 18,000 is not something you take for granted. The property tax median in Johnson County is $673 annually, the lowest figure on this entire list. Smaller farmhouse parcels and existing structures are available at accessible price points well below the larger tracts in the area, which tend to run toward the higher end for properties averaging over 70 acres. For retirees who want genuine seclusion with cool air, extraordinary stargazing, and a hospital that was designed with their specific health needs in mind, Mountain City represents a combination that's genuinely difficult to replicate elsewhere in the eastern United States. The honest trade-off: this level of remoteness requires deliberate planning. For provisions and services, it rewards the retiree who has already decided that planning ahead is a fair price for what they're getting. Erwin. 24% of Erwin's population is 65 or older. That's not a statistic, that's a community. When that large a share of a town has already made the same retirement choice, the social infrastructure that follows is organic rather than engineered. The pace is understood without having to be negotiated. Neighbors aren't baffled by your schedule or your priorities. The services that older adults actually need, accessible healthcare, community programming, calm commercial activity, tend to exist because the demand for them has been real and sustained for long enough to create supply. There's a difference between a town that is theoretically friendly to retirees and a town that has been shaped by them. Erwin is the latter. It's in Unicoi County and it sits at a crossing point for the Appalachian Trail and along the Nolichucky River, which means the active retiree has an immediate outdoor agenda available without driving anywhere. The Unicoi County Heritage Museum preserves the town's Clinchfield Railroad history, an anchor of local identity that gives the community a shared story to inhabit, a backstory that isn't manufactured for tourism but carried forward by the people who live there. The Erwin National Fish Hatchery operates public walking paths and gardens open to residents year-round, adding another layer of daily use outdoor access that doesn't require a trailhead or a membership. Median home listing prices run around $289,500, about $113,000 below the statewide average. Unicoi County's cost of living tracks 13% below the national average. The county property tax median comes in at around $960 a year for the retiree who wants a built-in community alongside built-in trail access. Without having to manufacture either, Erwin has already done most of the work. Paris. The 70-foot Eiffel Tower replica in the middle of Paris, Tennessee is a deliberate joke that the town has fully committed to, and that self-awareness about its own quirks is part of what makes the place work. The town knows it's not Paris, France. It's not trying to be, it's doing its own thing, and it has been doing it for long enough that the confidence is genuine. But the actual case for retiring here is practical rather than charming. Henry County Medical Center is a 140-bed facility with specialized emergency centers and hospice care for retirees doing due diligence on small-town healthcare. And all of them should. That's the level of infrastructure that often determines whether a rural location remains viable in later years. Access to hospice specifically is a factor that most people don't want to think about during the search process, but end up deeply grateful for when the time comes. Paris has it. Paris Landing State Park contributes 141 acres of lakeside recreation directly on Kentucky Lake, including a marina and a professional-grade golf course. 22% of the town's roughly 10,500 residents are already 65 or older. Median listing prices sit at around $309,900, with properties that frequently include several acres of gently rolling land, the kind of terrain that's easy to manage and easy to look at. Henry County's property tax median is $700 annually. Paris functions as a regional hub, which means retirees get the rhythm of a small town without the service gaps that purely remote properties sometimes carry. The healthcare access and the lake access aren't incidental features. They're the two things that distinguish this as a farmhouse retirement location, rather than simply a farmhouse location. Union City. The most unexpected thing about Union City isn't the home prices, it's that a town of under 11,000 people is home to Discovery Park of America, a museum and heritage campus that operates at a scale you would associate with a major metropolitan institution. The facility hosts rotating exhibits, permanent collections, and a heritage park that covers the natural and cultural history of the region at a depth that most small towns can't begin to approximate. The existence of that kind of cultural investment in a town with average home values around $160,000 and median list prices staying under $235,000 creates a gap between what the town offers and what it costs to live there that is hard to find anywhere in the current market. Obion County's cost of living runs 10% below the national average. The county property tax median sits at $697 annually and the third lowest on this list. The agricultural profile of the surrounding land adds a layer of practical value that matters for retirees with serious homesteading intentions. Obion County sits in West Tennessee's Loess Plain, a deep, silty soil type that is among the most productive in the state for food cultivation. That distinction isn't background detail, it's the difference between a hobby garden that supplements a grocery budget and a genuine food production system that changes how you live. Union City has the cultural amenity most small towns spend decades trying to build. It has the soil most agricultural counties can only claim by geography, and it has home prices that suggest suggests the market hasn't fully caught up to what's already there. That gap won't last permanently. It rarely does. Camden. Camden's most cited distinction is that the nearby Birdsong Resort is the only place in the United States that produces freshwater pearls. It's a memorable anchor for a town that doesn't actually need one to make its case. The Tennessee River runs close to Camden, and the climate in Benton County is mild in a way that translates directly to the farmhouse calendar. Stable growing seasons mean a garden planted here can produce longer and more reliably than in counties subject to late frosts or extended summer extremes. For retirees who intend to take the agricultural side of farmhouse living seriously, climate stability across the seasons is as important as soil quality. The median list price for homes in Camden sits at approximately $230,000, with average home values closer to $180,000. The county property tax median comes in at $717 annually. West Tennessee Healthcare Camden Hospital is a 25-bed facility with a certified chest pain center and dedicated imaging and laboratory services. For a retiree assessing a rural property with otherwise thin nearby medical infrastructure, the presence of a certified chest pain center is the kind of detail that changes a location calculation in a fundamental way. It's not the same as having a clinic. Cardiac emergency response capacity at that certification level means the first hour after an event, the hour that matters most, doesn't require a transfer to a larger facility. Camden is the quieter entry on this list, not distinguished by mountain elevation or a cultural campus or a presidential legacy. What it carries instead is the specific combination of river access, mild agricultural climate, low cost, and adequate cardiac emergency infrastructure that makes it function reliably as a long-term farmhouse base. Dyersburg. Dyersburg is the town on this list that works hardest to not feel like a gamble. As the regional hub for Dyer County, it has the kind of commercial density that purely rural locations can't sustain. Farm equipment suppliers, specialist healthcare, a functioning downtown built around the Dyer County Courthouse with antique stores and local diners filling the surrounding blocks. That town square represents a kind of civic infrastructure that has disappeared from many comparable-sized rural markets over the past 2 decades. Dyersburg still has it because Dyersburg still has the population density to support it. The Greenway system runs paved walking paths along the scenic bends of the Forked Deer River, which gives active retirees a daily outdoor routine that doesn't require driving anywhere. You walk out the door, you walk the river. That kind of built-in daily motion matters more for long-term health outcomes than most people account for when they're focused on home. Prices and tax rates. Median listing prices come in just under $215,000, which allows for the acquisition of properties with substantial land while remaining well below state and national home price averages. Dyer County's property tax median is $966 annually, the highest on this list, though still firmly within the affordable range for farmhouse owners. What Dyersburg provides that many other rural towns on this list don't is stability. The local economy is diverse enough to keep essential services open and staffed. The infrastructure is there because the population density justifies it. For a retiree who wants rural land and an actual town, not a town center that rolls up the sidewalks at 5 in the afternoon, Dyersburg is the answer. Trezevant. Trezevant's median home price pulled back 8.3% in 2025, landing at $129,016. That pullback matters because the town's overall trajectory since 2010 has been steadily upward. A temporary correction in a market with long-term price appreciation is, for a buyer watching their entry point, a narrow window, the kind that doesn't announce itself and doesn't stay open indefinitely. Carroll County in Northwest Tennessee doesn't have much commercial congestion. That's not a euphemism. It's the feature. The agricultural character of the area is intact in the way that only happens when growth has been steady enough to be real, but slow enough to not overwrite what was already there. Front porches in Trezevant are used for their original purpose. Neighbors wave because they know each other, not as a performance of small-town hospitality. Carroll County's property tax median is $890 annually, which sits comfortably within the range that makes holding significant acreage financially sustainable over a long retirement horizon. reason. Trezevant is the right town for a specific kind of retiree, one whose vision of the farmhouse years is built around simplicity rather than programming. No river to kayak, no cultural campus to visit, no presidential history embedded in the streetscape. What it has instead is a genuinely affordable entry into a town where the rural character is preserved by the economics of the place rather than manufactured for the benefit of newcomers. For retirees who have spent 40 years in environments defined by noise and density, that absence is not nothing. It's often the thing they were quietly working toward the whole time, even when they couldn't name it. Gates. Gates sits near the Mississippi Delta in Lauderdale County, and the land around it reflects that geography in the most practical way possible. Large agricultural tracts, established farming tradition, and the quiet that comes from a community whose relationship with the land goes back generations rather than years. The 2025 median home price in Gates was $127,790. The town has grown steadily rather than explosively, which is why its cost of living remains approximately 10% below the national average, and its character hasn't been erased by the kind of demand surge that typically follows a town being profiled in retirement publications. That kind of controlled growth is what keeps a rural community from pricing itself out of its own demographic within a decade of being found. Lauderdale County's property tax median sits at $808 annually. The nearest healthcare and shopping infrastructure is in Ripley, accessible without requiring a retiree to move closer to either one. That distance is calibrated, close enough to provide a safety net, far enough to preserve the separation that makes Gates appealing in the first place. The surrounding Delta agricultural land gives retirees who want serious hobby farming or homesteading a soil quality and a farming tradition to work within, rather than having to establish one from scratch. For retirees who want land-intensive farmhouse living near the agricultural and cultural heart of West Tennessee, Gates is one of the more quietly undervalued options on this list. The Mississippi Delta tradition runs deep in this part of the state, and that depth gives the surrounding community a rootedness that newer rural developments tend to spend decades failing to replicate. Duff. Duff is the town on this list for the retiree who has read through every other option and thought, still too many people. Located in Campbell County near the Kentucky border, Duff is surrounded by forested Appalachian hills and positioned within reach of Cove Lake State Park. The 2025 median home value was approximately $127,118. Campbell County's property tax median is $651 annually, and the second lowest figure on this list behind Mountain City. What Duff offers is an authentic mountain lifestyle with a cost structure that corresponds to its level of remoteness rather than its level of natural beauty. That gap between what the environment looks like and what it costs to be in it is the Duff proposition. The elevation, the forest density, and the proximity to the Kentucky border give this corner of Tennessee a visual character that distinguishes it from anywhere else in the state. Retirees who have spent time hiking the surrounding hills or camping in the national forest land nearby tend to describe the experience in terms that don't apply to most places east of the Rockies. The honest accounting of what Duff requires: fewer services, more intentional planning, and a self-sufficiency orientation that isn't aspirational but functional. Grocery runs, medical appointments, hardware needs. These require more thought and more advanced notice than they would in a town with more infrastructure. A log cabin or a rustic farmhouse built here is genuinely off the beaten path. Retirees who arrive expecting a hidden gem with hidden gem services will be disappointed. Retirees who arrive having already built the habits and systems that remote living requires will find that the land, the air, and the quiet more than justify the trade-off. Enville. Enville sits on the border between Chester and McNairy counties, which is a geographic detail that carries more practical weight than it might initially appear to. A town positioned on a county line draws from two administrative networks simultaneously: road maintenance, county extension services, emergency response infrastructure. Two counties means two sets of resources with overlapping coverage. For a rural farmhouse retiree, that kind of redundancy in public service access is a quietly valuable feature that rarely shows up in the listings but matters over a long time horizon. The 2025 median home value in Enville was $123,497, the second lowest entry point on this list. Chester County's property tax median is $837 annually. The surrounding area has minimal commercial activity, which is precisely what keeps its rural character intact and suppresses demand. enough to maintain the price stability that makes farmhouse ownership viable on a fixed income. Retirees who move to Enville aren't competing with a wave of buyers drawn by a specific amenity or a headline. They're moving into a town whose low profile is a function of its low profile. And that circularity is protective. Henderson and Selmer, both accessible from Enville, provide the essential services that daily life requires without pulling residents into a denser commercial orbit. For retirees whose farmhouse vision is agricultural and community grounded rather than recreation oriented, the Chester and McNairy County border region is one of the few places in Tennessee where the entry price, the rural character, and the access to external services align simultaneously, quietly, and without much fanfare. Sparta. Sparta calls itself Bluegrass USA, and the title is earned rather than assigned. The town is the birthplace of bluegrass legend Lester Flatt, and the White County Heritage Museum holds a dedicated section honoring his legacy alongside the broader musical and cultural history of the surrounding Cumberland Plateau region. Weekly bluegrass jams and a regular green market aren't programming events designed to attract visitors. They're the town's standing social rhythm, attended by the same people week after week because the music and the market are the point, not the marketing. For retirees who want a community they can participate in rather than simply reside near, that distinction matters more than it might initially sound. Recurring low-barrier cultural engagement of this kind is rarer in rural towns than the retirement literature tends to acknowledge. The Rock House State Historic Site, a 19th century stagecoach stop that hosted Andrew Jackson and Sam Houston, sits within the broader Sparta landscape, giving the area a layer of American history that coexists with the Cumberland Plateau views visible from farmhouse properties throughout the county. That kind of history doesn't announce itself aggressively in Sparta. It's embedded in the geography and carried forward by a town that takes its own story seriously without performing it for outsiders. Median home values in early 2025 sat around $222,006, with larger tracts featuring historic homes available for retirees whose budget and vision both run more expansive. White County's property tax median is $809 annually. The Veterans Park and Wall of Honor in the downtown area reflect a community that takes civic commitments seriously, a correlation in most small towns with the kind of stable, maintained public infrastructure that retirees depend on but can't always count on finding in markets at this price point. Sparta lands at the end of this list, not because it's the afterthought. It lands here because it makes the clearest argument for what the Tennessee farmhouse retirement is actually about. Not just finding a place that is affordable, but finding a place that gives you somewhere to belong. Tennessee's affordability isn't a temporary condition created by a slow market or an overlooked corner of the map. It's structural. The property tax rates, the senior property protections, the cost of living figures, those are the product of legislative decisions that have been in place long enough to be reliable and stable enough to build a retirement around. The property tax freeze program is worth returning to one more time because it answers the objection that outlasts every other objection in this category of retirement planning. The objection goes, affordable today doesn't mean affordable in 10 years. Rural areas develop, land values rise, tax assessments follow. Tennessee's answer to that objection is written into state law. Qualifying senior homeowners can lock their tax bill at the level it stood when they qualified, and it stays there regardless of what the surrounding land starts to do. That's not a promise made in a brochure. It's statute, and it changes the long-range math of rural farmhouse ownership in a meaningful way. The 15 towns on this list each sit on top of that fiscal foundation and then add their own distinct reasons to be there. A river, a history, a soil type, a medical facility with cardiac emergency capacity, a cultural institution that belongs in a city 3 times the size, a senior community that arrived before you and already figured out how to make it work, from a near blank canvas parcel in Hickman County available for under $50,000 to a bluegrass community on the Cumberland Plateau with weekly jams on the town calendar and a stagecoach stop where Andrew Jackson once passed through. The range of what Tennessee offers inside a consistent fiscal framework is wider than most people looking from the outside expect to find. The farmhouse retirement that looks like a compromise when you're calculating it from a high-cost state looks different when you run the same numbers inside a state where the architecture was built to support it. Tennessee didn't stumble into being the right answer for rural retirement. The math has been pointing here for a while. These 15 towns are where that math becomes a place you can actually live in.